Today, my friends, we are talking about money. Do you know that sometimes money mirrors the exact same dynamic of what's happening in the bedroom? My guest today is one of the most powerful voices in the wealth building space, Dr. Latana White, pioneering researcher, award-winning entrepreneur, and creator of Dynastic Wealth, a research-based framework empowering Black and Brown families in their first generation of wealth creation.
We enter into these relationships assuming that we're already on the same page about money. And because we aren't in the habit of having those crucial conversations, then we just kind of keep going, walking on eggshells, skating on thin ice a lot of times, right? So identity and intention is so integral to building a family dynasty because you have to see yourself as the architect of family wealth. In the work that I'm doing, financial wellness coaching, we're going through what are these money stories and what are your early money memories? What are some of those money milestones that became the through line, whether you did it consciously or subconsciously? Who do you see yourself as? Do you see yourself or do you claim the identity as the family ATM, or do we need to construct your identity as the architect of your family's vision for wealth?
I think a lot of people would be like, ooh,
Yes.
let's de-shame your money story. And maybe while we're at it, even unlock some financial foreplay. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Lover Society, the podcast for high-achieving couples and women who want just more connection, more joy, more ease, and yes, more pleasure in their relationships. I'm your host, Marissa Nelson, award-winning sex and couples therapist and the trusted intimacy coach to Fortune 500 executives and entrepreneurs around the world and founder of Intimacy Moon's Couples Retreats. Because today, my friends, we are talking about money. And not just budgets and spreadsheets, y'all. This is about your relationship to money because we all have a relationship with money and what it actually reveals about your relationship to intimacy. Why does talking about finances really shut us down sometimes? And why do we hold on to so much shame around debt and around our finances, our income, sometimes even the lack thereof? And how do we navigate our way around power and control around money? Do you know that sometimes money mirrors the exact same dynamic of what's happening in the bedroom? Whether you are the planner, the saver, the spender, or the one who avoids money altogether, this episode will open your eyes and hopefully soften your heart. We're going to have a super deep, honest, and open conversation because I really want us to unpack the emotional side of money, the kind that we really don't always get the opportunity in the spaces to talk about. So let's take a deep breath. I promise we will not pull too many edges today, but you are safe. So I want to introduce you to my friend,
Mhm.
really somebody that I deeply admire. And when I think about money, she is the first person that really pops into mind, Dr. Latana White. She is a pioneering researcher, award-winning entrepreneur, and creator of Dynastic Wealth, a research-based framework empowering Black and Brown families in their first generation of wealth creation. With over a decade as an entrepreneurship educator and 6 years researching wealth distribution in America, he has guided more than 10,000 historically excluded families toward economic mobility through their wealth literacy tools, coaching programs, and trauma healing methodologies. Her work is everywhere, y'all. She is on a stage if they call her, okay? She is everywhere. Her work has been featured in Essence magazine and recognized by the U.S. Departments of State and Commerce as well as U.S. Senate. She holds a doctorate, a PhD in leadership change, and an MBA. Dr. White brings 15 years of entrepreneurial experience to her career. Did I tell you she was a TEDx speaker too, y'all? I'm so proud of her, and I'm excited to bring her amazing work to this space. Welcome to the Lover Society, Dr. Latanya.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Marissa. Thank you for having me. I am excited. When you reached out about talking about financial foreplay, I was like, I love it. I love it. So I'm excited to I guess get under the sheets with you about this
Ooh,
thing.
is that your new segment? I like it. I like it. Thank you so much for joining us. I think let's, center what today is really about. This episode is about couples and women who are secretly stressed over finances. We talk about wealth, but on the journey to wealth building, there are a couple of steps that happen along the way. Sometimes people are super stressed about money, around finances. We understand the climate that we're in right now. Some people who may have been high executive CEOs can find themselves furloughed or find their partner furloughed, for example, or out of work. And so, what does that mean in their relationship? Even if that's not your season, some people are just arguing about money and feel super ashamed around money. So, I would love to know, like, what are some of the biggest lessons and patterns that you have noticed in your research about money?
Identity. That's so foundational to the work that I do in helping first generation families to build dynasties. And so a dynasty or a dynastic family, they've gone a bit beyond what we understand as generational wealth in that they've controlled their assets and their money and all of the things for at least three consecutive generations. So they go for three generations at a minimum, that wealth is transferred in four different directions. And then there are these five forms of wealth. But in all of that is identity. In all of that is who do I see myself as in relation to the future, in relation to members of my family that I may never meet. Identity and intention is such, from a social sciences perspective, is so integral to building a family dynasty because you have to see yourself as the architect, right, of family wealth. And because we tend, especially if you're a first generation wealth creator, if you're the rich auntie, right, then sometimes you feel like the family ATM. Sometimes you feel like, right? Yes, and so what I work with rich aunties, the one that made it, maybe it's the athlete in the family, and they have this guilt. They have survivor's remorse sometimes. And so then they take on the added responsibility of, putting everybody on their back so that they hope that guilt can be alleviated. But a part of it is, who do you see yourself as? Do you see yourself or do you claim the identity as the family ATM, or do we need to construct your identity as the architect of your family's vision for wealth?
I think a lot of people would be like, "Ooh."
Yes. In the work that I'm doing, financial wellness coaching, we're going through, right? What are these money stories? What are your early money memories? What are some of those money milestones that became the through line, whether you did it consciously or subconsciously? And that's a whole different emotional burden. So, through Dynastic Wealth financial wellness coaching, we're starting with healing, identity, mindset, and then we move into the structure and infrastructure of those five forms of wealth. But the first thing think that was most shocking to me was who do I see myself as in the conversation of wealth?
I really love that, but let's talk. Let's connect to this piece of not feeling like the family ATM, because on a subconscious level, what comes up is sometimes around fairness, sometimes around reciprocity, sometimes around entitlement. Because many people, because somebody has more money or has made it, sometimes people feel entitled. I've had conversations with CEOs and other executives who are like, people are like, well, I just need $5,000.
Yeah.
Got it. What's the problem? Like, I don't really understand what's the problem. And it is an entitlement that makes people feel a sense of, you know, just sadness and discomfort. And so sometimes when they give out of guilt versus giving out of okay, I'm giving it with the intention of being the architect of family wealth, or to do it in a different way of like structuring investments or structuring, you know, whether it's a trust or whatever other vehicles to be able to pass wealth to family members without feeling that sense of shame, but still feeling ownership around giving and receiving money.
Yeah, absolutely. A part of it also, I love that you mentioned those vehicles like the family trust. Within the framework for dynastic wealth, is how we combat entitlement is through education, is to ensure that you understand how, how this money was generated, how it was created. But there are also innate abilities within you, your passion, skills, and abilities to use this as an investment, right? How do we get a return on this investment from you? And we'll make sure that you understand that you're educated and that you've bought into the idea that you're a wealth contributor in this family and not just a consumer.
I like that too because it also gives ownership to the family member to start to do their part as well. That they are not just a passive bystander of, oh, please, I will, thank you for the enjoyment of
You're
your
right.
wealth. But, to also be kind of co creators in that and to support because that can also turn into a family business. Because if you have capital, you can kind of leverage that for maybe entrepreneurial ventures to be able to build more. So I really enjoy that. Another question that I am curious about is there's so much shame around money. I think money and intimacy and sex are very interrelated. They're siblings, cut from the same cloth. They're siblings because there's a lot of shame and there's also a lot of secrecy when it comes to wealth and money and also when it comes to intimacy and sex. And so I'm very curious about how do you think this shows up in your space when it comes to avoidance, when it comes to secrecy, and shame?
Yeah. Our elders and ancestors did the best they could with what they had. I think when we also think about how generational trauma, and how sometimes the lived experience or the trauma from someone else's lived experience, you become like a participant in, for lack of a better term. So sometimes those stories and those lived experiences, they get kind of twisted in our own interpretations because we also are not actively talking to older generations. We've lost the art of passing down oral traditions and capturing oral history. So if
Wow.
I am looking at my mom's actions through my own interpretation without asking her, then I'm going to make up the story and then I'm going to carry whatever shame or bitterness or whatever that was into my adulthood. And unless I'm intentional about communicating with Sparrow or, talking with the elders in my family, that narrative is going to keep getting twisted and keep being traumatizing, for lack of a better term.
Ooh, it really thinking about, just as there is the intergenerational transmission of trauma, you can also take shape of the narratives that you pass down from generation to generation. And so how do we kind of like heal that and that what's not transferred down is hoarding, hiding, fear, shame, and all of that stuff and versus how do we kind of transform that into a story of not just resilience but building of joy of prosperity. I really like that. How do we adopt that because you talked about the tradition of us sometimes losing sight of that oral tradition but kind of like the trauma being transferred.
Mhm,
Let's talk about couples because
mhm.
they are kind of beginning their own family and they're taking what they've learned from their own families and they're now creating this for their family. What is some of the advice that you have for couples who find themselves in this situation?
I don't know why I'm so excited to answer this question. So, Michelle Singletary, she writes for the Washington Post. The title of her series is called like The Color of Money. But she also is the author of the 21-Day Financial Fast. So it really looks at financial management and personal financial literacy through a biblical lens. She runs a personal finance ministry through the church that she attends. And there are a couple of chapters. One, I think this is very specific to your question for your couples, is what are your house money rules, right? So, what's the threshold? Is it over $200? Do I need to have a discussion with you, or can I just purchase it? For your clients who are, wealthy, ultra wealthy, maybe that threshold is $2,500. But we enter into these relationships assuming that we're already on the same page about money. And because we aren't in the habit of having those crucial conversations, then we just kind of keep going, walking on eggshells, skating on thin ice a lot of times, right? But there's one chapter in there about developing your house money rules, and the other one was entitlement. Like, what happened that you feel so entitled to spend money at Trader Joe's when we have to negotiate every time I want to pick up like a Snickers or something like that? So there's sometimes this entitlement, and a part of that, the response to that is what happened to you? What was going on in your upbringing? What were your experiences like going to the grocery store? Was there shame in how you were brought up? Was there food assistance? Like, were you walking in stores feeling ashamed to be seen with your parents because you had to use food stamps or welfare or whatever it was? And so now that you've made it, because you still hadn't reconciled that experience, but now that you've made it, you'll never go back there. And that's why you blow all your money, right?
That's so fascinating. In my world, it's very similar because just like with money, like I said, they're siblings. Like with money, sex is a place where people are very unconscious about what their belief systems are and how they operate in the bedroom. They get with a partner and they're like, listen, it should just be organic. Like, we should just already know what to do. I don't know you, or now that we're in a couple, we've been together for a long time. So what's up? But, sometimes we recognize one of the biggest things that I do with couples is to help them understand what their sexual rules are and their sexual belief systems are, because these are things that we often don't examine, but we're very much operating subconsciously, and we are unaware of how some of our belief systems are really showing up. So it's fascinating. I think the second thing that I'll say is I love what you said about entitlement. And in my world, entitlement comes from when we have not had our needs met for so long. That entitlement becomes the protective part of us that shows up and is like, oh, no, 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 this is what I want, because we have gone without for so long that now this is our part of ourselves that are kind of making a stand to say, this is what I deserve. But sometimes that part of us is misinformed, because you always deserve and are worthy of wealth and health and intimacy and all of those things. But what does that mean in collaboration with another? Because sometimes when we do it for ourselves, we're so used to not getting it and not being able to have those conversations so that we can, we can negotiate what needs for both of us look like so that I don't go without. But when you're so used to going without, the only way that you know how to make a stand is through entitlement. So I think it's like a loving way of taking care of ourselves. But sometimes it's kind of misinformed and like rooted in, not getting our needs met.
Mhm. Oh, this is so rich because I remember an article, and this article, it stayed with me, and it speaks a little bit about how, the narrative about rich kids and wealthy kids is they're so entitled. But one of the things that you just said is about how that entitlement or showing up with entitlement is trying to meet a need that hadn't been filled before. This article, the title was called Freedom from Wealth. And I've not gotten to a place in my life yet where I need to be free from wealth. So the title was really just like jarring for me. I'm like, what is this? But as I was reading it, it was written by a private wealth advisor, and one of the things that he shared that he talks with his clients about is ensuring that there's enough freedom and flexibility within how you transfer wealth, that the children's or the descendants' identity is not tied to money. And so the thesis of that is if there is freedom from wealth and my identity being tied to wealth, then I don't grow up being entitled because I'm not searching for the opportunity to express who I really am. So you sharing that literally like 5 years later made it make sense.
Oh, well, I think that it's just this conversation of also how people use money to fill emotional needs. And on my side, how people use intimacy and sex to fulfill emotional needs of maybe feeling neglected by their partner or abandoned or not good enough. Part of what I research is how worthiness is one of the biggest drivers sometimes of desire or lack thereof. When we don't feel worthy, this is why sometimes sexual rejection hurts so much, because when our partner does not want to be intimate with us, we perceive it as, oh, is my partner not attracted to me? Does my partner not desire me? Does not my partner not want me? And so inherently worthiness is one of, sometimes we play it out in the arena of intimacy, and in your space looks like we're playing it out financially as well, right?
Yes.
The next question that I have, I really want to talk a little bit about financial infidelity. I know sometimes we talk about emotional infidelity, but what does it mean to like cheat on your partner, or, what does it mean to disrupt, so to speak, your monogamy agreement or your trust. But this, I'm very curious about talking and exploring financial infidelity, hiding things from your partner, not being forthcoming with family members around certain things. What do you think about that? What's your take?
Think kind of going back to our this through line of shame. Some examples of financial infidelity for those that may not be familiar. We talked about those house money rules, right? So maybe there's that $200 threshold. If I see something that I want that's more than $200, if I go out and get it, like purchase it for myself without having a discussion with you, even though we agreed that there would be some discussion, then that's some infidelity. That's financial infidelity. Now, what would drive me to do something like that and put our relationship in danger is more than likely the pain. I'm seeking the pleasure of that thing, and the pleasure of that thing is more important to me than the pain that the decision could cause. Why would I do that? There's something about my lived experiences. There's something about the narrative that I carry with me. There's something about those core memories that have shaped my identity, that those things are more painful to me than what I'm going to do to you in this decision-making process. So I'm going to go spend the $250 because I don't want to feel the way I did when I was 7 years old again. I can bear with you giving me the cold shoulder or you taking away my card or whatever, but I don't want to feel like that 7-year-old again.
Absolutely. I mean, nobody wants to feel, and I think a lot of times when we are challenged when it comes to money and the interplay with a partner too, it's times feels it's coming from a very unconscious place. So, your reaction is your reaction. If somebody is questioning you around money, that's one thing. I think the second thing is when I see behaviors of people hiding things, there is a lack of trust in the relationship, but we don't always know how to negotiate or work through trust issues with our partner. I don't know for some people if those trust issues exist with or without your partner or in other
Mhm.
areas of your relationship, but at least financially, one could make the one could really connect the dots and see that if I don't trust how you manage money, what does that mean to my sense of security? Because another link that I found is that money gives us a sense of security,
Mhm.
emotional or financial. And everybody's financial ceiling looks different because somebody can feel very secure with $5,000 in the bank, and somebody can feel very secure or not secure with $5 million in the bank. And so I'm curious about when you think about that too for couples, can you talk also a little bit about how we have differing opinions of financial stability and
Yeah.
safety?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also speaks to, again, what's that core memory, right? Because, so I'm a phenomenologist. I am something like a phenomenon,
Ah,
but
look what it means. I like that. I like that.
so, so phenomenology is the study of the lived experience. So that's why you hear me mentioning lived experience a lot because it matters so much. So when we think about two different people having had two different lived experiences that we don't always unpack in the dating process, in the courting process, and even if we do a prenuptial agreement, we aren't really getting into, well, when was the first time you felt stripped of your personal power? Like, we aren't getting into those conversations. But now we're bringing those two experiences, those two stories, and we say we're creating one life, but we're not intertwining as much of who we are with the other person. That's what, kind of leads to financial infidelity, emotional infidelity, and even sexual infidelity. There are parts of us that we still have not, it's the classic Johari window. There are parts of us that have not been exposed to us, and then some parts of us that we do know, we don't want to share because we haven't reconciled. We haven't healed from whatever aspects of ourselves that we're ashamed of. We haven't come to this place where I can accept that I did not know this thing and it resulted in this. But now to accept that part of me and share it with you, if I'm not a healed person or if I'm not on an active journey towards healing with, a therapist like you or another professional, then I'm not ready. I'm not ready to do those things. And I might just be okay living 75% of what life could really give me because I'm just not ready to address that other 25% in that
Ooh,
blind spot.
that is big. That is so, so big. And this is why some people would rather stay safely stuck than really be able to go through the fire to heal and to get to that other part of themselves. And I think you mentioned something so powerful, which is power. If somebody finds themselves in a position where maybe they're not the breadwinner, maybe it's their partner, where or they used to be, and now that's changed, and they feel like they have lost, power or financial power to their partner. What's some advice that you have for them?
Oh, so they may not like this, but this is where you and I like would kind of, be volleying with them and getting them to this place. But before and even as I'm working with families who are ready to build their dynasty, if the family's not open to healing, and especially if that wealth architect, if you are open to having a conversation with yourself, let's go through some prompts, let's ask some questions, let's really do the work. It's going to be ugly cries and snotty noses probably, but but let's prepare to do it. That is the first step. So this is where we're talking about the psychology of money. We're infusing the what happened to you, also looking at, especially in the context of dynastic wealth, um, The Whiteness of Wealth. So that's another book that your audience may find valuable because it really breaks down. You're trying all the things. You're checking off all the boxes. You're doing everything they said you were supposed to do, but you don't feel like you're getting anywhere. And so that's also a part of the reconciliation process, right? Is to understand that when you follow, right, when you follow and check off all the boxes blindly, you trust but did not verify, you don't know what systemic barriers are in place. And that takes this emotional and psychological toll. So the healing process, especially for couples, because now we're two become one, where two narratives and two lived experiences are coming together to create something new. We have to get to the core of who we are. And sometimes our core identity is not out of reach, but we're so not accustomed to saying, no, I'm going to stand 10 toes down in this because this is who I am, not because this is who I'm supposed to be. This is who I am. And so being in contact with your core identity, not your chosen identity, not how you choose to show up in the world, not your given identity, but at your core, and then making decisions from, does this align with who I am at my core? Does this align with what vision that I have in relationship with this partner for what we want to do to impact the world through the gifts that we have?
Yeah, that's so profound. I really, really appreciate that perspective of like, how do we really reconnect to our intuition and what we've been called to do a lot, and the work that you've been called to do. I know a lot of people who've been able to build generations full of wealth that still find themselves deeply unhappy and dissatisfied. And I've also know of people who that I, clients and people that I've worked with in the past and even just anecdotally who if they don't achieve what they like in the bedroom, or maybe one partner achieves or one partner is feels the financial burden, it affects their relationship in their communication and in the bedroom. So one of the last questions that I'm going to ask you is about respect and money, because I do feel like there are a lot of people who genuinely love their partner, but when they feel the weight of the financial burden, let's say there's a partner who has been unemployed for some time, or somebody who is at home more often taking care of the kids, where they love that person, but you start to see respect significantly erode for that person. And so then sexual attraction and charge for that person also diminishes, and they are less likely to want to be as intimate, or even when they're intimate, some of the through lines that I start to see is where they want their partner maybe to be more dominant. Maybe they
Mhm,
want their partner to take the lead more often, emotionally, romantically, sexually. And when
mhm.
those things don't happen, that really makes that person pull back a lot. Those are some of the patterns that I've started to see. But I'm curious about what you think too.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with, we're in a capitalistic society, right? So let's think about the homemaker. Let's think about maybe the stay-at-home mom or the stay-at-home dad and the invisible labor that's associated with that. I was reading something recently that talked about, all of the emotional labor that it takes to run and manage a household. I think it said something around the salary would be the equivalent of around $168,000, which is, depending on where you are in the world, can take you pretty far. It's pretty decent salary. But because we live in a capitalistic society, the I need to be able to put that $168,000 in the bank. I don't have as much value, or I don't have as much of an appreciation for this abstract idea of you could be worth, right? $168,000. And I think it's very important for couples, especially in this case, to remember that, going back to core identity, going back to core values, that the reason that we're connected, I mean, unless you were betrothed, the reason that we were connected, the reason that we connected in the first place was from a heart to heart connection. Hopefully it wasn't about how much money you make or what your value or your contribution to society was. And so this is where, and I love your couples retreats, right? Really getting into a space where you are focused on each other and remembering what your worth and your value is to each other without the noise of society, without the narrative of capitalism, but really saying, I respect you so much. You show up for me in these ways, and it's invaluable to me. I can't put a price tag on it. But the busier we are, the more meetings that we're in, the less time that we have to maintain that heart to heart connection, the easier it is to devalue each other because of financial differences.
Absolutely. And then we're reframing our relationship as a family and as a couple to money because in the past, in previous generations, let's be honest, marriage was a financial agreement and a way for financial status, upbringing, throughout the generations it was a financial agreement between families and sometimes to keep wealth between families like it was assigned like
Uh-huh.
this is the way the contract of marriage happened for a lot of generations and certainly in a lot of cultures still to this day. But for a couple really trying to figure their way out of maybe didn't grow up in the best of circumstances or didn't grow up with a lot of financial means, now being able to work hard and making it, so to speak, find themselves, in as the architects of
Mhm.
really trying to co-create wealth and really build forward. And so how can couples really be on the same side versus look at each other and finances being a place where they see each other as enemies or they feel like they have to check each other or that you're going from a parent-child dynamic, right? And so now let's get to some tips. When it comes to financial foreplay tips, do you have any kind of takeaways that you really want people to know more about to help them on their journey to wealth creation as a couple?
Yeah, I think when it comes to financial foreplay, one thing that would be really fun to keep in mind are what are the ways that you treat yourself with money? Like for me, I will go broke in a bookstore, right? But if you know what your partner loves and values, and maybe it still meets the house money rules, right? You're not going and blowing $3,000 on something that your partner loves. But financial foreplay, how do we use money to help us become a better version of ourselves? Does that mean we're investing in advanced training, education? Are we gifting them a certificate to some course, to a subscription for LinkedIn Learning? How can, as a couple, you gift and use money as a tool to help become the better version of each other or of yourselves? I think that's something really important. And it's a fun way to do, to spend money, but still within those house money rules, right? I think that's one. Another one is really getting down to what is our vision for wealth. There is a question in that Freedom from Wealth article. The advisor asks, what is it all for? Like, why are you working so hard? Why are you working 80 hours a week, not at home with your family, not being there to create those core memories for your kids if you have no vision? So if you are able to say, I'm willing to make in agreement with my partner. We're willing to make this sacrifice of my time for this amount of time, right? Like it's going to be a fixed start and end point, and we want to make sure that we see a return on that investment because it's going to lead to X, Y, and Z. So we got the fun side with, investing in better versions of ourselves, and the more serious side with establishing our vision for wealth in those contracts.
I love that, especially when you say that it really is, what is it all for? Because I do see people burnt out. They are burnt out. Y'all out there are burnt out. Y'all tired. Y'all are tired, okay? Because there are narratives about you got to keep going, you got to keep building, you got to keep. And this is the reason why I think that it's so important to understand what your own I think that we don't understand within ourselves what our own ceiling, or even for us, what gives us a sense of financial security. Because people are running their whole lives trying to get to a certain point, and they get to that certain point and then they're still not happy or still don't feel like it's enough. And what do you sacrifice in exchange for that? You exchange not being the person who gets to go to your kids recital. You exchange not being present in your life. You might exchange that for even anxiety of building and scaling and moving faster, but really not being able to be as present in your life and in your body as you would like to be. So I really want for you to examine what that looks like. And I love what you said, Latanya. I want us to continue with a segment that we call Calling All Lovers. And this is, in preparation for this episode, I had put out on IG and in some of my mom groups and friends this question around money and intimacy. And here's one of the letters that I received anonymously. And I want us to kind of unpack this together. So, in this letter, somebody says, "Hi, Marissa. My partner and I are both doing well professionally, but money has always been a hard subject. I grew up watching my parents argue about finances, and I've noticed I shut down anytime the topic comes up, even when we're not fighting. I feel ashamed about my student debt, and I never feel ready to merge accounts or be fully transparent with my partner. My partner, on the other hand, loves to plan and budget, but sometimes I feel like I'm being audited. Like I always have to explain every decision. And I don't want money to be the thing that keeps us distant, but I don't know how to talk about it without spiraling. Sincerely, trying but triggered."
Okay. Okay.
So I'm
Wow.
going to let you what do you think about that?
Wow. That is it deeply resonates. Before we started, right, I was talking about Oprah and Dr. Perry's book, What Happened to You? And there's this one exercise in the book where it essentially asks you to try to recall your earliest memory of being stripped of your personal power. For lack of a better term. So as I'm reading through this book and doing this exercise, and it was so impactful to me. This was during the pandemic. It's such a core memory, Marissa, that I remember. Like, I can take you to the place where I was. I was walking around this neighborhood. I can take you to the block where I was standing when I heard this part of the book, and my visceral, physical, very emotional reaction to the question, because I knew the answer. I was around 7 years old. And as I reflect back on it, I think this was when my mom and dad were starting to separate. That was probably the first time that I felt abandoned. And the book asks you to kind of envision, like visualize what that feeling was. And I remember feeling like I was literally alone in the woods. Like, for all the girl moms out there, you probably know that's a Frozen 2 reference, but I felt alone in the woods. And so as I'm continuing to do the work, I then began to make this correlation between how at the time that my mom and dad separated, my mom took on another job, right? I was raised by my grandmother during these very formative years. And I mean, I never wanted for anything. I might have to do a little negotiation, right, as a 7 or 8 year old, but anything I asked for, I got. So, one of the things for me that I recognize is my feelings of abandonment had been tied to material gifts. So I would have the hardest time receiving because I always thought you were trading your time that you would want to spend with me for like this toy or this trinket. So what makes me think about that particular response from your readers is there is like we got to go back to the place where she can or where they can first remember feeling abandoned because there's some sense of abandonment that may be tied to the triggering within that relationship.
To your point, I also think about how our earliest memories shape our beliefs around money. When we think about even just our core belief systems around money, our subconscious mind really drives a lot of our decision making, particularly around our finances. And so some of these earliest memories really kind of codify and solidify how we spend money, give money, receive money, especially for women. I've noticed because we are such givers, we are, very much kind of in that giving role. Sometimes it's hard to receive. And then, really to be able to negotiate what it means to be in relationship with somebody else who has a completely different money style as you, it can bring up a sense of shame and a sense of guilt, right? Nobody wants to feel audited. And I could see that happening in a lot of dynamics where you feel like you have to account for things. And to me, that brings up sometimes the parent child dynamic of when you're young, having to report, why did you buy that? Why did you spend that? And so that already is a snapshot that gives me a window as a therapist in exploring what some of those deeper power dynamics in the relationship are, where you can do very well. Does one person feel like they always have to, not just check in, but always have to defend themselves?
Mhm.
And so
Absolutely.
that can really exist inside and outside of the bedroom. So if anybody else is listening out there, you can start to see how some of those money dynamics also mirror some relationship dynamics that can come up. And I think a huge lesson to all of us is how do we start to look backwards at how those our earliest memories around money shape our beliefs around love and around trust, because to your point, when we think about love and trust, sometimes parents, caregivers, people who loved us may have swapped out their affection for financial, may have swapped out their love for stuff
Yeah.
or lack thereof.
Yeah.
And so we remember that. And sometimes we blame the money when we really were wanting to feel a sense of belonging or wanting to be wanted, wanting to be cherished, wanting to be chosen.
Yes. That's really good. Really good.
Does that resonate?
It really does.
And I have a couple of tips because I really, I want this to be very practical. This is a podcast not just for your listening ears, ladies and gentlemen. This is really for you to learn, to grow, to be a better person and a better human and to have a better relationship, because that is, your relational health is a priority. And one of the best, for you and your overall health, the partner that you choose and the way that you live is essentially one of the biggest financial decisions that you could ever make. So here are some tips that I really want you to take away for your homework. This is your pleasure practice, so to speak. I want you, the next time that you're thinking about money, in my world, I think about things somatically, not just what you think about, because we get kind of valued for like how we think, how we operate, but how does that emotion sit in your body? We all have our stories around money. And your first homework assignment is I want you to not just spend, but I want you to name the emotion, not just the expense. I want you to be thinking about when you think about spending, when you think about receiving money, I want you to take a moment and take a breath and notice what happens in your body when you send, spend, or receive money. they're usually kind of messages that come up, chest tightening. Oh my gosh, do I have it in my account? What does that mean? Like there are messages, and even if it's like, "No, no, well, what is it? My kid's private school, and what does that mean if I send this? And da 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 da." It's not about having it or not. This is not the discussion. The discussion is what happens in your body when you think about sending or receiving money. Name the emotion, not just I'm spending this and thinking about it as a line item on a spreadsheet. Um, and journal about it, because I want you to be curious about your own habits and your own belief systems around money. The second thing is when couples talk about money, sometimes I can tell by their language whether they have joint accounts or separate accounts. I can tell by their language if they are collaborative with money or they are not. Because they're like, oh, you buy this. It's, yours. Well, you spend that with your money versus no, okay, yes, and, right? How do we cultivate an hours mindset around money? Like, how do we co-create a vision for money, finances? Well, you can be as collaborative in parenthood as you have to be when it comes to your finances. So also, how do we change our language around the way we talk about money? Because it ain't just your money or my money, because you are intertwined in a relationship, and particularly with the life that you share together. How do we become more collaborative around that and create habits of connection even around our money? I think the third part of that is, how do we not weaponize money? And how do we not weaponize mistakes around money? We are superhuman, and we do make mistakes. We do fall short. We do spend emotionally at times. We do things to fill and fulfill needs within us. And so how might we be more gracious when our partners make mistakes? How can we be forgiving, and how do we rebuild trust sometimes when we do need to rebuild trust financially? Sometimes some of the biggest hurts that my clients have experienced have been financial, when they felt like a partner withheld something from them, or their partner lost money on an investment and didn't tell them and took it from kids' savings account. Like, these are things that are really wounding. But how do we find our way back to connection? And or how do you know if you have a partner that might not be letting you in financially, and now we're tipping over into the territory of financial control? When we look at the power and control wheel, how do you know that your partner, this is not an extension of emotional trauma that you find yourself in? I say that delicately because, I mean, this is a delicate space, and I trust for you to make the best choices, but this is about awareness and for you to understand where you might find yourself in your money journey. So with that, I think the last thing about financial foreplay is that transparency is super sexy. You guys, like, being very open, transparent, and honest when it comes to money is a sense of vulnerability. Do you know money and sex are some of the most vulnerable, shameful, for some people, topics that are wired within us? So when you're able to be vulnerable and say, this is what's coming up for me, and this is where it stems from, and I grew up not having, and this is why this matters to me. You are not arguing about the thing or the purchase. You are getting much deeper into the paint of, like, why you make the choices that you do. And when we are aware about it, we can make different choices. And so I want to empower you to, embrace your financial sexiness by, building more vulnerability with your partner. And I would love any kind of final thoughts from you, Dr. White.
Oh my goodness. I love this so much. I love this so much. I think this is so important. This work, this narrative, this through line is so important. For the communities that we serve, for our clients, because remember that a dynasty is 3 generations, right? So we have to do the work. We are the ones that our grandchildren and our great grandchildren are waiting for. So just like we know hurt people, healed people can help heal people.
That's my friend. And it's just so wonderful when you have a friend that you so admire. I like admire your mind, your thought, your leadership. I admire even just kind of your mission and your purpose because you are so passionate about the work that you do, and I'm really proud of you for all of that.
Thank you.
So thank you for joining me here today. What was your how'd you like being in the Lovers Society?
Love it. I'm like, I can't wait for this episode to air because I have a couple of friends in mind. Like, this might help.
Let's
Oh,
push
this is
this.
so
Let's push this your way.
This is so good. Thank you, Marissa.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so happy that you can join me today because I think that a lot of your advice, your wisdom, your research is really going to resonate with so many people. And so out there, if you're listening, your pleasure homework is to ask your partner, what did money feel like growing up for you?
Yeah.
Or what would it mean to be supported financially and emotionally right now? Because these things are very interconnected. I want you to walk away with feeling and kind of really start your journey on feeling like money is a place where you can really learn and grow and be vulnerable together because I want to de-shame the space. We want to de-shame your money. We want to de-shame your intimacy so that you can get lit and have the best intimacy ever. What's better than that? Where you can have it all. Like you deserve to have it all so that you don't have to operate in secrecy or in silence in your intimacy or in your relationship. Less spreadsheets, more closeness. Okay? So you got this. I'm so proud of you and I will see you next time. And thank you, Dr. Latanya, for joining us. You are a treat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marissa.
All right. Bye, everyone. See you next time.